The spell landed near Vikir, causing his horse to jump to the side in fear. From high above the gate, Losis shouted at the group, demanding that they wait and not enter the Morg's land without permission. She insulted them, calling them stupid swordsmen. She even threatened to test the strength of the rising star of the Baskerville family. In response, Staffordshire started drawing his sword and said to Vikir that he didn't think the situation could be resolved with words. Vikir agreed with Staffordshire's words, indicating that he was prepared for a fight. As Vikir and Staffordshire were about to react, one of Vikir's group members shouted that the girls didn't even know their place, calling their words absurd. Two other members echoed his sentiment, saying the words were absurd. Vikir heard the voices and thought that he had heard these voices before. The three sisters then spoke, with Hysis saying that the group members were just mere underlings, Middleseas questioning if they thought their ranks were higher than theirs, and Losis saying that they didn't even know their place. The three members of Vikir's group stepped forward to confront Morg's three flowers, denying their accusations by saying "not us" repeatedly. The three members removed their hoods to reveal their faces, and they were none other than the Baskerville triplets, Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough. They stood with confidence and pointed at Vikir while declaring in unison that he was the symbol of Baskerville. The triplets then turned to Vikir and smiled while saying "leave this to us," assuring him that they would handle the situation. Upon hearing their words, Vikir made a strange expression and exclaimed that his annoyance had increased to the power of 2. Vikir found himself questioning the identity and intentions of the individuals before him. Their strange behavior left him bewildered and curious. Highborough glanced back at Vikir, expressing his gratitude for recommending them to the academy. He indicated that Vikir should leave this situation in their capable hands. Vikir's thoughts raced as he began to piece together the situation. It became clear to him that their actions were motivated by their connection to the academy. However, he couldn't help but see them as mere sandbags. Vikir was aware that in the future, the triplets would become murderous soldiers. They lacked the intelligence to make independent judgments but could effectively carry out orders. Vikir believed that with his training, they would prove to be useful. Vikir smiled and expressed his intention to place his trust in the triplets while referring to them as his older brothers. Upon receiving Vikir's affirmation, the Baskerville triplets displayed signs of joy and satisfaction. Morg's three flowers, who had observed this exchange, expressed their disdain for the Baskerville triplets' close bond, labeling them as ignorant fools who relied solely on each other. Unfazed by the taunts, the Baskerville triplets responded defiantly, while showing their middle fingers, and asserted that it was Morg's three flowers who were the real fools. Morg's three flowers were fueled by anger and vowed to discipline the Baskerville triplets for their insolence. Vikir's thoughts shifted as he recalled his past knowledge. Before his regression, he had known the Morg triplets as powerful mages who possessed the attributes of water, earth, and nature. Their combination of highly compatible magic attributes exponentially enhanced the effects of their spells, earning them the title of the Morg's Three Flowers. As the Morg's Three Flowers combined their magical abilities, a colossal vine made of soil and plants emerged, forming a formidable barrier. Hysis, positioned atop the wall, burst into laughter, mocking the Baskerville triplets with her taunts. Middleseas and Losis turned to their adversaries, questioning if they could overcome the obstacle. Undeterred, Highborough readied his sword, dismissing the plant barrier as insignificant. With precision and skill, Highborough executed the Baskerville first technique, effortlessly slicing through the massive vines. Staffordshire marveled at his perfect execution of the first technique. However, before Highborough could fully recover, he sensed an incoming attack. He managed to block a whip-like strike from the vines with his sword, although the force behind it pushed him backward. Middleborough and Lowborough called out in worry as they witnessed Highborough's predicament. Losis wore a smug expression, mocking the Baskerville triplets and asserting that their swords were incapable of reaching them. The Baskerville triplets responded with intense anger, their expressions resembling hounds ready to hunt their prey. Staffordshire turned to Vikir and asked him if he found the situation enjoyable. Perplexed, Vikir questioned what Staffordshire was referring to. Staffordshire explained the ongoing clash between magic and swordsmanship, highlighting the long-standing debate about which is stronger. Magic utilizes surrounding mana to amplify and reproduce elemental powers, while swordsmanship channels the user's energy and mana for explosive and enduring strength. Staffordshire found pleasure in observing the potential and talents of the clans of mages and swordsmen who would shape the future. Vikir said that if viewed from that perspective, he was also a part of them. Staffordshire commented that Vikir had already surpassed others his age. Vikir, uninterested in the ongoing fight, expressed his frustration and wished for all of them to perish. He felt that it was a waste of time, as he had important tasks to attend to, having recently found a supervisor with a significant workload. Just then, someone arrived at the scene and began casting a fiery spell. Anger infused her voice as she questioned what the others were doing in front of her territory. Hibaro, who was busy fighting, took the opportunity to attack Hysis, believing he had the upper hand. However, the situation quickly changed as they noticed a massive fire approaching them. They were taken aback and shocked by the unexpected turn of events. A tremendous explosion of fire engulfed the area, causing tension in Staffordshire but eliciting a smile from Vikir, who wondered if everyone had perished. To Vikir's annoyance, he realized that the Baskerville triplets had survived the attack. He looked at them with a displeased expression, uttering a disapproving sound. Hibaro, in a state of shock, questioned the sudden appearance of fire magic. Middleborough shouted at the figures behind the smoke wall, expressing frustration at the near-death experience they had just encountered. Behind the dissipating smoke, the three flowers of the Morg clan were in tears. Middleseas, still shaken from the near-death experience, expressed her relief at having survived. Hysis chimed in, acknowledging that if she had dodged the attack even slightly later, she might not have been so fortunate. Losis, scared and seeking comfort, voiced her fears to her older sisters. The person responsible for the powerful fire spell questioned the situation and asked what was going on here. Vikir looked up at the figure who had unleashed the attack. It was Camas Morg, standing atop the castle gate wall with flames still burning in her hands. Camas looked down and declared her inability to forgive anyone who caused trouble within her managed territory. As she landed in front of Morg's three flowers, Middleseas tried to explain that their intention was to stop the invader, while Losis added that the fight had been initiated by the other party. Camas cast a cold gaze upon them and questioned their informal way of addressing her as Camas, emphasizing her position as the vice head of the fortress. Middleseas couldn't help but shudder in fear, denying any disrespect and quickly correcting herself, addressing Camas with the appropriate honorific. Camas then pointed towards the treetops where dead skeletons hung, warning them to be cautious if they wished to avoid a similar fate. Middleseas let out a frightened cry and apologized for their actions. Camas noticed Vikir, and her eyes widened in shock. She approached him and remarked that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, recalling that it had been 7 years. Vikir smiled and acknowledged that it had been a while, and he greeted her as Camas Morg. Vikir wondered if Camas's more mature appearance was the reason for her increased attractiveness. He pondered the beauty of Camas Morg, who had captivated the hearts of many men in high society. In his previous life, there had been scandals and rumors surrounding her, as she allured even married men. However, he found it strange that there were no such rumors in this lifetime. Nevertheless, he brushed off those thoughts. Vikir straightforwardly requested Camas to open the door, stating that words wouldn't work on the triplets. Camas was taken aback by his blunt words. She looked angry and questioned if that was all he had to say after such a long time. Vikir gazed at her with a look of curiosity and inquired about what he should say instead. Camas's anger flared, and she exclaimed in frustration. Staffordshire observed Camas's escalating anger and wondered if the next fight would be between the superstars of the two clans. Camas pointed her finger at Vikir. Her eyes filled with angry tears, and declared that he scored 0 points. She accused him of having a disrespectful attitude towards his future wife, giving him a score of 0 out of 100. The Morg's three flowers, the Baskerville triplets, Vikir, and Staffordshire all looked at Camas Morg in disbelief. Camas averted her gaze to the side, her face blushing, and muttered a huff. Everyone present was left with the same question in their minds. Whose wife? Vikir and Camas rode their horses together, making their way toward the fortress. Camas remarked that the Baskerville clan seemed to have little knowledge about the barbarians. Vikir confidently replied that they were well aware of the barbarians and fought against them frequently. He claimed that they knew more about the barbarians than Morgs did. Camas questioned why Vikir had sent the idiots then, referring to the Baskerville triplets, whom she considered young and foolish hounds. Vikir explained that it had already been agreed with the Morg clan that the main force would be positioned on the other side of the mountain range. He questioned why Camas was asking when she already knew the arrangement. Camas smiled and remarked that she believed Vikir might not be well informed about barbarians. Vikir retorted, asserting that as the person in charge of the delegation, he naturally possessed extensive knowledge. Camas said that despite being someone whom the clan might have wanted to discard, he seemed to be quite trusted within the clan. The topic shifted to which of the barbaric tribes was the most annoying. Vikir looked at Camas and thought to himself that she kept asking questions. He then mentioned the warrior tribe called Balak and the sorcerer tribe known as Rokoko. He emphasized the exceptional archery skills of the Balaks, which surpassed those of the Empire. He also mentioned that this information was not widely known. Camas acknowledged Vikir's knowledge about the ecology of the barbaric tribes and awarded him 8 points out of 100 in her own unique scoring system. Confused, Vikir questioned the purpose of the points. Camas simply replied that it was because he had answered well. Vikir looked at her with a hint of curiosity. Camas continued her evaluation of Vikir, expressing her dislike for intelligent men and stating that she found men more interesting when they were a little foolish. Firstly, Camas turned her attention to horseback riding, remarking that Vikir's choice of a large horse was ill-suited for his shorter stature. She considered this a flaw and decided to deduct 6 points. Continuing her evaluation, she moved on to fashion and expressed her disappointment with Vikir's lackluster clothing choices, assigning him a mere 4 points in this category. When she noticed that Vikir was ignoring her, she gave him just 1 point for his mannerisms. Camas then smiled and awarded his face 99 points. However, due to his poor control over his facial expressions, she deducted 1 point. Vikir, growing frustrated, told Camas to stop the useless evaluation. Camas questioned why it was useless, asserting that she needed to be stern with her future husband. Vikir, perplexed, asked why he was considered her future husband. Camas reminded him of a test he had passed previously, which was conducted by her uncle. Vikir realized she was referring to an incident that happened 7 years ago when he had dueled Camas' uncle to test his abilities as a potential husband. Camas became angry, expressing her dissatisfaction with her uncle's decision and how it had obstructed her path to marriage. She reluctantly acknowledged the promise that had been made and decided to follow through with it, although she resented the situation. While Camas was venting her frustrations, Vikir observed her and acknowledged her prowess as a great fire mage. Interrupting her, Vikir declared that he had forgotten about what happened that day, and that he would make it as if it never occurred. Camas's face flushed red after hearing this, and she threw a jacket at Vikir. She exclaimed that he couldn't simply reverse something that had happened and called him a dummy. She referred to herself as a genius and boasted that once she witnessed something, she never forgot it. Vikir looked at the jacket that Camas had thrown at him and realized that it was the same jacket he had given her during their duel 7 years ago when her clothes had burned. Camas, with a red face, dismissed Vikir's words as nonsense. Vikir examined the jacket and wondered if she had returned it without washing it. As they reached the outskirts of the fortress, Camas informed Vikir that the barbarians had ambushed the ruby mine, either pillaging the indigenous slaves or the crops. She explained that they took slaves to sell them elsewhere. She pointed out a wall that had been built by both earth and iron mages over the course of a month. Impressed, Vikir acknowledged the skill of the Morg mages, noting that it would have taken several hundred regular people around a year to achieve the same result. Camas proudly affirmed his observation. Vikir noticed some large holes in the wall and asked if they were caused by the arrows shot by the Balaks. Camas confirmed that the arrows carried a strong aura and had caused numerous casualties during nighttime guard duty. She mentioned that the arrows were capable of breaking through 2 to 3 meters thick walls, showcasing the unmatched talent of the Balaks. She revealed that her uncle had suffered a severe chest injury from the arrows that breached the shield's magic, but fortunately, he survived, albeit with wounded pride. Vikir recalled that the patriarch of his clan had a similar experience and had injured his nose bridge. Curious, Vikir inquired about the talented individual among the barbarians, to which Camas responded that she believed it was a female. Due to their black painted faces, it was challenging to discern their physical traits. Vikir and Camas turned around as a mage approached them, addressing Camas as the vice head of the fortress. The mage reported that a recon member of the barbarians had been captured and urged them to come quickly. Curious and concerned, Camas and Vikir followed the mage to a tent where the captive barbarian was being held. Vikir observed the barbarian and identified him as a member of the Rococo sorcerer tribe. Camas inquired if any information had been extracted from him. The mage informed them that the barbarian remained uncooperative and resistant to psychic magic due to his strong sorcery, making it impossible to read his mind. Camas then questioned the barbarian about the recent ambush on the Morg clan's fortress and asked him if he remembered how many people they had kidnapped. When the barbarian remained silent, she further added that among the victims, there was a daughter of the Morgs. Her name was Rose, and she was Camas' 6th cousin. She asked the barbarian what had been done to her. The barbarian responded with a smile and spoke something in his native barbarian language. Camas turned to the mage and requested a translation, asking about the whereabouts of the barbarian who rebelled. The mage reported that when the barbarians attacked, everyone at the fortress had either died or been taken away. Camas then asked if there was anyone present who could translate what the barbarian was saying, to which the mage replied that, at that moment, there was no one available. Suddenly, Vikir spoke up, stating that he knew a little of the Rococo language. Camas expressed surprise, questioning what Vikir didn't know how to do. Vikir clarified that he was not fluent and only had a basic understanding of the vocabulary. Camas requested Vikir to ask the barbarian about the whereabouts of her kidnapped sixth cousin, describing her as a 12-year-old girl with red eyes, red hair, and white skin. Vikir posed the question to the barbarian in the barbarian language, and the barbarian responded with an evil smile and gave him a short reply. Vikir closed his eyes and relayed the grim news to Camas. Her cousin was dead. Camas's face filled with anger upon hearing this. She declared that since the senator of the audience hall was currently being treated and the senator of the temple was away on an inspection, the decision would be made by her, Camas Morg, a member of the middle house and the vice head of the fortress. She declared the verdict, immediate execution. A spike pierced the barbarian's body, and soon he was consumed by fire. As the barbarian burned, he uttered something, but Camas dismissed his words, saying that after the war, the language he spoke would only be used in hell. The barbarian's companion watched in horror as he met his fiery demise. Camas, still filled with anger, turned around and urged Vikir to follow her. Vikir silently observed her departing figure. As Vikir exited the tent, he was greeted by the sight of Camas crying out loud. He walked towards her, recognizing that despite her tough exterior, she was still only 15 years old. Vikir asked her about her close relationship with her cousin, and Camas confirmed that they were indeed very close. She described her cousin as a pure child who didn't fit into the cold-hearted Morg clan. Vikir tried to console her, saying that he believed her cousin had left this world comfortably. However, Camas looked at him and expressed her doubts, stating that she was a genius and understood a little of what was said. She asked him to tell her honestly if what she heard was true. Vikir felt tense and wondered if she had understood the barbarian's words correctly. What the barbarian had said previously was, "We ate her." Tears once again flooded Camas's eyes, and she fell to her knees, apologizing for not being able to protect her younger cousin. Vikir witnessed her anguish and initially extended his hand to comfort her. However, he hesitated and retracted his hand back. Camas's cries filled the air, leaving Vikir standing there, pondering the situation. After some time, Camas managed to stop crying and wipe the tears from her eyes. She expressed that it wasn't a bad thing, stating that if someone had shown half-hearted sympathy, she would have killed them. Looking at Vikir, she declared that it was not the time to mourn and that she needed to quickly regain her composure and seek revenge. Vikir observed her strength and determination, acknowledging that heroines were indeed different. He extended his hand toward Camas, agreeing with her sentiment. However, before she could take his hand, a loud voice sounded, resembling a bell-like sound. Vikir questioned the source of the sound, and Camas stood up, explaining that it was the signal that notified them of a barbarian attack. Vikir remarked that her time for revenge had come rather quickly. Somewhere outside the fortress, a group of barbarian girls sat on white wolves, armed with arrows and bows in their hands. Their leader prepared an arrow and shot it toward the guards standing on the fortress walls. Caught off guard, the guards were unable to react in time, and the arrow caused a devastating explosion in their vicinity. The barbarian girl then ordered her companions to begin attacking. The barbarian, along with her wolves, engaged in a fierce battle against the soldiers of the Morg clan. The wolves attacked with ferocity, while the barbarians slashed at their enemies. They used ropes to tie the soldiers' necks, incapacitating them. Just as the chaotic scene unfolded, Vikir arrived and witnessed the gruesome sight. He wondered if he had arrived too quickly, observing the intense fight between the Morg soldiers and the barbarians. Suddenly, a rope flew toward him and wrapped tightly around his neck. Vikir looked ahead with a questioning gaze and realized that two barbarian girls had skillfully used ropes to secure it around his neck. They spoke in their native language, mentioning something about catching a good one and the hunt for husbands going well. Vikir realized their intention and thought to himself about the barbarians hunting for husbands. He deduced that they were capturing people to become suitors, aiming to breed a superior race for their tribe. Swiftly, Vikir caught hold of the rope and swung it, causing the girls who held the leash to be flung into the air. Vikir simply said that he couldn't be their husband and that he might already be engaged. As the two barbarian girls slammed into the ground, the male barbarians watched in shock. They began preparing for an arrow attack, uncertain of Vikir's affiliation. One of them questioned his companion if Vikir was part of the enemy forces. Undeterred by the situation, Vikir didn't back down. He boldly moved forward, heading straight toward the incoming arrows. In his mind, he recalled Hugo's eager request for him to avoid initiating a battle before joining up with the main force. He contemplated whether he should wait for the main force to arrive. With determination, Vikir drew his sword and swiftly cut down the incoming arrows with precise strikes, showcasing his skill and agility. The barbarians were shocked by Vikir's display of skill and expressed their disbelief. However, their surprise was short-lived as a sudden fire attack engulfed them, causing them to cry out in pain. Camas, who had used the fire spell, appeared behind Vikir and expressed her anger towards the barbarians, declaring their demise. Vikir observed Camas with surprise as he realized that she had turned the entire area into a sea of fire. Camas questioned Vikir, asking if he had used liquid aura, implying that she recognized his abilities as a graduator. She stated that she knew he was the only man she could acknowledge. Vikir confirmed that he had received an order from the Patriarch to avoid battles until regrouping with the main force. Undeterred, Camas began casting multiple spells and questioned if it was an order from Baskerville's Patriarch. She then asserted that a Baskerville should refrain from intervening, as she intended to eliminate all the barbarians. Camas unleashed a series of powerful attacks, burning a vast area in front of them. Vikir looked in shock and recognized the spell as burn. He also noticed that she was employing a quadra casting technique for burning spells, and he observed an increase in the lethality of her attacks. Camas, driven by the desire to avenge her younger cousin, continued to cast spells, determined to carry out her revenge. Suddenly, a barbarian used a dart blower and blew a needle that landed on Camas' neck. She felt the sting and realized she had been poisoned. Camas noticed a barbarian sitting on a wolf's back who had attacked her. She fell to the ground, unable to move due to the numbing poison. Vikir observed her condition and thought to himself that she was quite a handful. The barbarian then threw a rope toward Camas, but Vikir swiftly caught it before it could reach her. Camas acknowledged his catch and complimented him. Vikir looked at her and suggested that it would be better for them to retreat. Camas questioned what would happen to the farmlands and the captives. Vikir replied that it would be wiser to avoid engaging in battles until the main force from Baskerville arrived. Camas, determined to avenge her cousin who had been taken away by the barbarians, refused to retreat. Vikir looked at her and urged her to make a rational decision. However, in the next moment, Vikir sensed an arrow attack approaching from behind his head. With quick reflexes, he managed to dodge the arrow just in time. Vikir observed the barbarian girl who had launched the arrow and wondered if this was the destructive power Camas had mentioned earlier. However, while lost in his thoughts, a barbarian arrived behind him and swiftly took Camas away. In desperation, Camas called out Vikir's name, desperately seeking his help. Vikir watched the scene unfold in frustration and contemplated the situation. He recalled a time in the past when Camas Morg, still an adolescent, was held captive but returned after annihilating the barbarians. Despite her reputation as the Queen of La Rouge et La Noire, Vikir realized that he needed to do what was necessary. Suddenly, the barbarian girl lunged at Vikir, launching an attack. With remarkable agility, he swiftly evaded her strike, his senses sharpened. To his astonishment, he discovered that she had used a bow to attack him. The barbarian girl immediately followed up with a kick that sent Vikir sliding back. Vikir assessed the situation and thought that her movements were different from the other barbarians. He wondered if he needed to go all out against her. However, to his surprise, the barbarian girl attempted to speak in his language. She said, "You, me, we meet again." Vikir looked at her and realized that this barbarian girl was the one he had freed during the slave auctions. He couldn't help but call her a bastard in his mind. The barbarian girl looked at Vikir with a smirk and said, "We meet again." Vikir's memory flashed back to the slave auction where he had liberated her from her cage. He hesitated for a moment, then asked her if she intended to repay his act of kindness with revenge. The barbarian girl clarified that her vengeance was directed towards the Morg clan, as they had captured her and enslaved her. She emphasized that Morg clan had no direct connection to Vikir. She mounted her wolf and declared that she would repay what she had received. She declared her intention to exact revenge and take Camas, the next leader of the Morg clan, as payment for what she had endured. If Vikir desired to rescue his girl, he was to follow them. Vikir considered whether he needed to reveal his power in this situation. Just then, Camas' uncle, Adolf, arrived and called out to Camas. Vikir looked at Adolf Morg and wondered if he had come after learning about the ambush. Adolf immediately began casting a spell and called the barbarians bastard. Adolf launched the spell, causing the ground to break, and demanded the barbarians to return his niece. But the barbarians swiftly maneuvered over the surface with the aid of their wolves. They deftly leaped between the shattered rocks and managed to escape. Adolf witnessed this with frustration and uttered his displeasure. Vikir thought about Balak and how the ambush had concluded merely 3 minutes after the warning bell had rung. The situation had escalated due to Camas' carelessness and lack of practical experience overlapping with it. Vikir then noticed a mage who informed Adolf that they believed the barbarians had fled to the restricted area of La Rouge et La Noire mountain. Adolf exclaimed angrily upon hearing the news, fully aware of the perils associated with the restricted area. He understood that the restricted area was an uncharted and hazardous place. His mind was concerned about the idea of venturing there at night, knowing well the risks it posed. Despite his niece being captured, Adolf found himself questioning if there was any action he could take in this predicament. Just then, Vikir spoke up, stating that they could still pursue the barbarians. Adolf was taken aback and questioned Vikir's suggestion, as entering the forest at night was considered dangerous. However, before Adolf could inquire further, Vikir interrupted him and confidently stated that he had extensive experience navigating the dense forest since his childhood. Vikir reflected on his past, realizing that before his regression, he had gained valuable knowledge and skills through reconnaissance and subjugation experiences in various dense forests. Adolf grabbed Vikir by the shoulders, eager to confirm his seriousness. He asked if Vikir was truly committed to the task at hand. The mage from the Morg clan advised Adolf, referring to him as the Grand Senator, that venturing to La Rouge-et-la-Noire mountain would be a suicide mission. However, Adolf disregarded the warning, asserting that those who didn't want to go were free to abstain from the mission and he wouldn't hold it against them later. Adolf looked at Vikir and acknowledged that he already knew the extraordinary nature of this young individual. Reluctantly, he realized that he had no other choice but to rely on Vikir's abilities. Addressing Vikir directly, Adolf entrusted him with the responsibility of saving his niece. The dense forest of the La Rouge-et-la-Noire mountain within the Baskerville territory was described as a treacherous habitat filled with bone-sucking mosquitoes, poisonous thorny vines, silent spiders, and other dangerous creatures. It was known as the life-engulfing forest because a normal person wouldn't be able to survive there for more than an hour. However, Morg and Baskerville's troops closely followed Vikir through the dangerous forest. Vikir swiftly ran through the forest, impressing Adolf. Unable to contain his curiosity, Adolf asked if all boys from the Baskerville clan were like Vikir. Staffordshire Baskerville stated that not all individuals were like that. However, he acknowledged that young Master Vikir was an exception. As Vikir came across two poisonous bees obstructing their path, he effortlessly eliminated them with his remarkable skills. The Baskerville triplets observed Vikir's impressive demonstration of expertise and couldn't help but feel a sense of awe, finding him truly cool. Suddenly, Vikir stopped behind a tree and instructed the group to halt. He noticed some light ahead and informed the group that he believed the barbarians hadn't fled too far. Vikir then shared a rumor he had heard about the Balak hunters scattering dry leaves to listen for the sounds of their pursuers. He emphasized the need for extra caution from that point forward. Unexpectedly, Adolf approached Vikir and cast a spell called Silence on him. Vikir looked at him with a questioning expression, and Adolf quickly explained that the magic would prevent Vikir from making any noise as he walked. Adolf smiled and declared that he would take over from that point onward, expressing his gratitude for Vikir's assistance. He referred to Vikir as his nephew-in-law, leaving Vikir puzzled as he wondered about the meaning behind this familial term. Not far from their location, the barbarians had set up their camp in the forest, with a fire burning in the middle. Camas, who was tied to a tree trunk with ropes, shouted at the barbarians, threatening to burn them all to death once she escaped. She boasted about her special fireball and warned them to prepare themselves. However, the barbarians paid no attention to her, most likely because they couldn't understand her language. The barbarian girls standing before Camas engaged in conversation. One of them expressed her liking for the guy they had encountered earlier, while her companion mentioned her failure in husband hunting. Camas observed their interaction and thought to herself, frustrated that they weren't even listening to her. She concluded that they had been discussing husband hunting and wife hunting since earlier. She wondered if this was the reason they had been ambushing their group. Just then, the barbarian male who had captured her approached Camas. He spoke to her in the barbarian language with a smirk, suggesting that since they had captured such an excellent female, all the males within their tribe would desire her. Camas shouted back, calling him a perverted bastard and questioning his intentions. She pleaded for him to kill her instead. The barbarian scratched his ear and remarked that he didn't understand what she was saying. He caught her face by her chin and he claimed that he could tell she was talking back just by looking into her eyes. With an evil expression, he licked the arrowhead in his hand, suggesting that he believed this arrogant slave needed to be disciplined. Just as the argument was about to escalate, the barbarian girl, who had been saved by Vikir from the slave auction, arrived at the scene. She referred to the barbarian male as Ahun and firmly told him to stay away from her slave. Ahun was taken aback and called out to her as Commander Ayan, proudly stating that he was the one who had captured her. But Ayan called his words bullshit and told him to keep his voice down. Ahun tried to defend himself, questioning her defiance and insisting that he had shot a paralyzing arrow and set a trap to capture their target. In response, she pointed out that it was thanks to her intervention that Ahun's life had been saved, as she had stopped the boy who was good with the sword. If it weren't for her intervention, he would have been dead by now. Ahun questioned whether Camas had become the commander's booty, to which Ayan confirmed. Camas observed their argument and pondered if an internal dispute had arisen among the barbarians. With her limited understanding of the barbarian language, she deciphered the girl's name as Ayan and deduced her role as the commander. Ahun then stated the fact that Ayan was a female commander. Ayan retorted, asking him what difference it made. Camas realized that Ayan possessed the skill to go up against Vikir, who was a low-ranking graduator. If she wanted to escape, she knew she had to deal with Ayan somehow. Ahun pointed his finger at Ayan and declared that he wouldn't tolerate her stubbornness just because she was a commander. Ayan became angry, and a blue aura surrounded her. With a fierce look in her eyes, she warned Ahun that if he was pissed, he could come at her anytime, and she would turn him into a bloody mess. Fear struck Ahun, and his entire body was covered in a cold sweat. He raised his hands in surrender, acknowledging defeat. He conceded that he was not angry and told Ayan to do as she pleased. After Ahun left the scene, Camas looked at Ayan and thought that it seemed like the girl had won their dispute. Ayan then turned her attention to Camas and praised her for her good eyes and physique. She acknowledged that such qualities were expected of her as the future leader of the Morg bloodline. However, Ayan kicked Camas and revealed that she had been captured by the Morg bastards and sold into slavery. She was lucky enough and had managed to escape that fate with some kindness, but she warned Camas that she wouldn't be as lucky. Ayan vowed to tame Camas to the point where she would feel it in her bones and soul. She ominously mentioned that performing menial tasks, such as licking the space between her toes, would become a daily routine for Camas. Just then, a loud scream came from behind Ayan, and as she turned back, she saw a large fire. She questioned if it was an explosion. One of the barbarians was engulfed in flames and screaming in pain. Meanwhile, the other barbarians prepared their weapons and shouted that it was an ambush. A figure emerged before the fire and condemned the barbarians, vowing to repay them for what they had done. Camas's face lit up with a smile as she recognized the voice and shouted, "Uncle." Adolf Morg, who was responsible for the massive explosion, stood there with flames still burning in his hands, and in a stern voice, he demanded the immediate return of his niece. The barbarians were taken aback as the Baskerville and Morg clan members began hunting them down. Vikir, perched on a tree branch, observed the scene and found it strange. He couldn't understand why the Balak hunters, who had ambushed them systematically, were in such disarray. The barbarian girls rode their wolves and expressed their frustration at the chaotic uproar caused by the Baskerville and more clan members within the forest in the middle of the night. Adolf witnessed the barbarians attempting to flee, and he vehemently declared that they should not be allowed to escape. He insisted on eliminating every single one of them. Camas, who was tied to a tree, smiled at the chaotic scene, feeling satisfied and thinking that the barbarians deserved it. Just then, Camas heard some sounds coming from behind and became shocked. She turned around and saw Vikir. He placed his finger on his mouth, signaling her to be silent, but she couldn't contain her excitement and shouted his name. Vikir quickly cut the ropes that had tied Camas to the tree and offered his support to help her up. Camas was filled with happiness and asked him if he had come to save her. Vikir was slightly annoyed and questioned her lack of understanding of the gesture of silence. As they began to walk away, Ayan suddenly appeared before them. She recognized Vikir's exceptional knife-wielding skills and expressed her anticipation of his arrival. Ayan praised Vikir's strong physique, which allowed him to cover long distances in a short period, his level-headedness that guided him through the darkness of the forest, and his passionate and pure love that made him risk his life for Camas. With a smile, Ayan conveyed that she wouldn't inquire about Vikir's past and mentioned that he had passed. Vikir was left perplexed by Ayan's statement, questioning what exactly he had passed. Camas and Ayan locked eyes and engaged in a silent battle, conveying their intent through their intense gaze. Vikir tightened his grip around Camas and realized that it might be difficult to conceal his own abilities in this situation. He couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't recall anyone like her from his previous life. Vikir questioned himself whether Ayan was the one who scarred Hugo's nose bridge, the Balak archer known as the Night Fox. However, he concluded that she was still too young and inexperienced to be that person. He also considered the possibility of her belonging to the same bloodline as the Night Fox. Suddenly, a barbarian launched a surprise attack on Vikir with a dart, but Vikir managed to block the attack with his hand, causing the dart to break upon contact. It was the same barbarian who had kidnapped Camas, and he was shocked by how Vikir knew about the attack. Vikir then took Camas in his arms and informed her that things had become troublesome, and that he would take her to her uncle. Blushing, Camas agreed to accompany him. She was surprised by his use of formal language and concluded that it might be due to the effects of the poison. Moving swiftly from their current location, Vikir headed toward Adolf. Ayan looked disappointed and expressed her desire for Vikir to return obediently with her. Meanwhile, as Vikir carried Camas, he asked her if she was severely poisoned. Camas replied uncertainly, stating that she believed she might be. As they made their way, 2 barbarians fired arrows at Vikir, but he skillfully blocked both attacks, ensuring their safety. Ayan, on the other hand, prepared her bow and arrow, taking aim at Camas. With a cold tone, she questioned whether she should eliminate the girl from Morg. Without hesitation, she released the arrow, which left a bluish aura trail as it traveled toward them. As the arrow approached them, Vikir looked back with his eyes glowing red and noticed the arrow aimed at Camas. Surprised by Vikir's sudden reaction, Camas turned her gaze backward and saw the arrow, which was dangerously close to hitting her eye. However, just as the arrow was about 2 inches away from Camas's eye, it froze in place, halted by a wall of ice cast by Adolf. The protective ice wall prevented the arrow from reaching Camas. Adolf expressed his worry, exclaiming about his niece's well-being, and Camas, relieved, called out to her uncle. Adolf took hold of Camas and cast a spell called Cure Poison on her. He explained that it was a severe numbing poison, making it challenging to completely remove. He suggested visiting the divine Quo Vadis when they returned to seek further treatment. However, Camas pushed Adolf's hand away, requesting him to let go for a moment. Confused by her sudden request, Adolf complied. Camas then ran toward Vikir, jumping onto him and embracing him tightly. She expressed her gratitude, thanking Vikir for saving her once again. Adolf was taken aback by this unexpected scene, and in disbelief he shouted Camas's name. He looked at Camas with teary eyes and attempted to explain that he had also done his best. However, Camas, with an angry expression, questioned why her uncle had only arrived at that moment. She declared her intention to tell everything to her mother, expressing her dissatisfaction. Just as they were moving forward, a rope suddenly flew towards Vikir and wrapped around his neck. It was Ayan who had thrown the rope, attempting to pull Vikir towards her. However, despite her efforts, Vikir remained steadfast and didn't budge. Ayan couldn't understand why Vikir was so strong, not yielding even an inch. Ayan expressed to Vikir that it would be best if he obediently allowed himself to be captured, as she claimed she didn't have much time. Camas, witnessing this exchange, recognized Ayan and exclaimed her disbelief at encountering her once again. Vikir broke the rope around his neck and pondered Ayan's words about there being no time. He wondered if there was a specific reason for the Balak to be in such a hurry. Suddenly, a wave of killing intent engulfed the entire forest. Birds took flight in a panic, and a sense of dread permeated the area. Ayan looked up in horror and exclaimed, realizing that whatever she had anticipated had finally noticed their presence. Beelzebub on Vikir's hand began to buzz, and he looked down to find his hand stained with red lines. He realized that the hidden Beelzebub within his arteries was giving him an intense warning, indicating that something was approaching. Ayan uttered the words, "She's coming." Vikir looked at her with a questioning gaze and wondered who or what Ayan was referring to with the word she. With a cold sweat covering her face, Ayan uttered the words, "Madam Eight Legs." Suddenly, a massive pillar-like structure emerged from the heart of the forest. The barbarians recognized it immediately and exclaimed, "It's the Madam. The Madam is here." Camas gazed at the towering pillar, questioning whether it was truly just a pillar. Meanwhile, Vikir looked up and denied the possibility, saying, "No way." The pillar, shrouded in a purple aura, suddenly burst open, revealing 8 elongated appendages resembling branches. These legs descended rapidly and firmly rooted themselves in the ground. Adolf, overcome with concern, voiced his disbelief, finding it impossible for such a monstrous creature to be concealed within this forest. Vikir's face grew anxious as he had never thought he would encounter this monster in a place like this. He realized that the creature he was facing was none other than Madam Eight Legs, a notorious entity with an S risk rating. The gigantic spider stood tall on its 8 legs and emitted a piercing scream that resonated throughout the entire forest, instilling fear in everyone present. Everyone stood frozen in fear as they gazed at Madam Eight Legs, her dominating figure commanding attention. Camas attempted to speak, but Vikir quickly placed his hand over her mouth, silencing her. Worriedly, Vikir whispered to Camas, reminding her not to make loud noises as Madam Eight Legs had poor sight but sensitive touch and hearing. Vikir's thoughts wandered back to an old native's warning he had heard before his regression, about the incidents associated with the La Rouge et La Noire mountain. It was a legend that resembled a horror story, one about the madam with 8 legs who dwelled deep within the forest. The Empire's Monster Dictionary, after several revisions, contained written records of this terrifying creature, known as Madam Eight Legs, ranked as an S-tier risk and capable of causing nationwide destruction in a single day. Suddenly, Madam Eight Legs emitted a piercing scream, accompanied by a stream of greenish liquid that sprayed from her mouth. Some of the corrosive substance landed on tree branches, causing